Okay, so welcome panelists to this panel. And do a selfie first. All right, thank you. So the purpose of this panel is to explore how UN can effectively engage with open source communities and projects to accelerate the progress of its SDGs. And this session will focus on defining the policies, processes, governance mechanisms required to enable open source contributions in a secure, transparent, and impactful way. So I kind of designed the panel in four sections. And the first block, we're going to discuss governance models. Second block, we're going to discuss contribution pathways. The third block, we're going to discuss policy and legal consideration. In the fourth block, we're going to discuss alignment and validation, and then we'll kind of close the loop from there. So, panelists, thanks again for joining me, and please briefly introduce yourself and especially your role in open source. You already, everybody knows you.
I think that I've introduced myself enough today. I'm Mehdi Snen, sitting at the Office for Digital and Emerging Technology at the UN Secretariat, and I'm the chair of the UN Open Source Conference.
Thank you.
Hello, Noman Ferry. I'm a failed scientist who turned to be Minister of Digital Economy, and now I'm a VC investing in deep tech technology.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vincent Caldera. I work for Red Hat as a Chief Technology Officer for Asia-Pac. I do contribute to multiple open source projects, but essentially Cloud Native Computing Foundation, specifically on AI. In LFAI and data, I'm focusing on the AI supply chain. And I've been working for 4 years now a lot on sustainability in particular across a number of organizations, including Green Software Foundation, as well as open source climate.
And Vincent, you were voted as like one of the top 10 CTOs?
Yes, somehow I was elected. I still don't know how it happened, but yeah.
Okay, great. Matt?
So I'm Matt White. I'm the executive director at the PyTorch Foundation and GM of AI at the Linux Foundation, leading our overall AI strategy. I kind of drift between doing technical things and code-based things to teaching and kind of meander into this policy and governance space once in a while when I feel like it.
Yeah, in case you guys don't know, Matt is I call it the father. Once I call him the grandfather of MOF. You said, yeah, I'm not that old. So the father of MOF. MOF stands for Model Openness Framework. It's a work to, Matt and the community created to combat open washing. We can get into details about that later.
Yeah, thanks, Annie.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Li Yunyang, and I have introduced myself just now, so maybe.
Okay, everyone. My name is Richard Lin, Lin Yuqiang. I'm the co-founder of Kaiyuanshe. Kaiyuanshe in Chinese, it means Open Source Alliance in China. Kaiyuan means open source, and the She means community. And I'm the co-founder we co-founded Kaiyuanshe in 2014. Yeah, and this is the first OSI affiliated organization, a community in China. Yeah, so we want to bridge the overseas open source community and the foundations and the Chinese open source community. So that's just a community, not a job. My current job is a consultant, OpenQ consultant, to help Chinese enterprise and the project to connect with overseas. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's just dive into the questions. So my first question is for Matt. Matt, right now you're the executive of PyTorch Foundation, and PyTorch Foundation community is a very successful community with lots of support, lots of momentum. It's almost a de facto standard for AI infra. So from your experience working as an executive of PyTorch, what governance models that you think that UN should adopt and adapt to foster a transparent and inclusive participation in SDG-related projects?
Wow. That's a pretty loaded question.
I'm watching you.
That's why I gave you a fan.
I'm like way down here. Like the
give you a
UN is
fan.
way up here.
Yeah.
I'd throw something up in the air and see if it sticks.
Yeah, by the way, because this is a very complex subject and all of us are very new to this, intersection, right? Some of us are open source community people and some are like, policies and UN people. And now we're gonna put our heads together to come up with a solution for Dr. Sanini to take home. Okay, and then people in the audience, I know I have you have experts in the audience. I just could not fit more people. So please move to the first 2 rows and just participate, raise questions, or if you want to share your comments, please feel free. Let's make this very interactive. Okay, Matt, sorry about that.
And check my emails for me too on my laptop there, please. So maybe I'll answer this with like a meandering kind of thought, which is, I've kind of thought about like there's a little bit of a bridge that needs to be built, I think, between folks operating within the confines of the UN and within more globally, right, global representation, and those kind of boots on the ground in open source. And I think there's sort of this disconnect that I see, which is that as I work with developers, on a day-to-day basis, and our own types of governance frameworks, right, that we put in place to ensure vendor neutrality and to ensure that we're, being fair, and even like the responsible AI frameworks and these sort of things, don't have like a direct line to UN SDGs. And I think there needs to be something in place to bring that together. And maybe it's just a lack of knowledge, maybe not strictly on my part, but also in the communities around what is happening at the UN, right? We know what these SDGs are. I have the benefit of having participated in like a TED AI hackathon and judged some of these projects, and they were sort of oriented towards solving problems that were in line with the UN's SDGs, the 17 SDGs. But beyond that, I think there still needs to be this bridge, sort of a gap between those developers and boots on the ground and what the UN's particular objectives are in this space, right? And bringing a panel together like this is really great because now we have the opportunity to make the connections and kind of keep the dialogue going. But I would say like frameworks like Model Openness Framework do solve some piece of this, but there's no direct line towards ending poverty, right? Now, can these kinds of frameworks contribute to those SDGs? Certainly, but there needs to be a broader strategic vision for how to bridge these gaps. And if I want to dig deeper into this particular instance, like Africa doesn't have the same talent pool that we have in the Bay Area, right? And Africa is a huge continent. It's a lot of countries. It's a lot of people. So we have an education gap, right? And that solves another in one of the SDGs. And so I think we have to impart upon us that have the knowledge and experience and the tools to be able to impart that knowledge more broadly so that everybody realizes those benefits. And putting in solid frameworks, I think, will help that. And I think smaller frameworks like the Model Openness Framework and the Responsible Generative AI Framework are moving in that direction, right? But I think ultimately there maybe needs to be broader collaboration and broader strategic initiatives.
Yeah.
Everybody disagree?
I'm waiting for her.
You can jump in anytime.
Go
I mean,
in.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do think the fact that Dr. Sanini is here, it speaks volume that the UN is recognizing open source and see the values of open source, and then they have OSPOS for Good conference every year to try to engage, and then also we're doing this event here. But but open source community is huge, right? And then it's also very bottoms up. And even like for open source software, we're evolving because the traditional open source software community is focused more mostly on software. But now we're moving into the AI era, and we notice that it's a different community than the traditional open source community because the AI involves data scientists and stuff. So even the open source community is evolving, and on top of that, now we're trying. I think it's an opportunity to mobilize the open source community and open source AI community to work with UN. There's definitely a lot of opportunities there, a lot of work there, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of challenges there too.
Oh yeah, and just a note on that, we just actually launched our OSPO outreach.
Yeah.
So we are working to connect with academic OSPOs, organizational OSPOs, and those that work in industry as well. I think that shared dialogue will help us really move the dial.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things we just don't know, right? And I'm speaking from a place of technology, but there's a lot of downstream impacts that we can't see,
Right.
that we need others to provide a nice feedback loop, and hopefully that can help us get better at what we do.
Yeah, yeah. So, so that kind of leads to my next question. Well, let's talk about challenge first, right? My understanding, and I have to apologize in advance, I don't fully understand how UN operates. But my perception is UN is more centralized, provides centralized, kind of more top-down kind of hierarchy. Maybe I'm wrong, but you can correct me. And open source, like I said, we are wild beasts. We're very decentralized and in different forms, like the traditional open source, like I said, AI open source, we're different, but people are because of that, we're very innovative, things move very fast. So, how can we balance the centralized oversight with the decentralized, very fast-going innovation, collaboration? I'd like to ask Mr. CTO of the year.
Sure.
Yeah.
Annie. So I can speak with a bit of experience on this because I've had a chance for the past 4 years to be involved with one very specific SDG, which is climate action. So 4 years ago, we created Open Source Climate, and the goal of Open Source Climate was to really look at how we leverage community, very diverse community, between academia, data provider, policymaker, technology companies as well, and the financial industry to really facilitate climate transition. And so it was led by the belief that we can't actually achieve climate transition if it's not financed. But in order to finance climate transaction, we need to provide very accurate data and risk model for financial institutions to obviously channel the capital. So we decided to approach this on an open source approach. And I learned a few things in the process, right? The first thing is, I think we really had to think about breaking down the problem. Like you say, to work between a very highly centralized institution and open source community, probably the first thing we had to do is start to break down the problem into, like probably objectives, minute objectives that we can delegate to very specific community. So an example of this was we created a group focusing specifically on physical risk management. And their focus was really to try to see how we can acquire data such as satellite data that is traditionally used for maybe meteorology, but then start to use it maybe for climate simulation. So in order to do this, you need to convince, obviously, data company scientists to actually collaborate. And you can only achieve this if you have very, very specific objective. Otherwise, people just get lost in the process. So breaking down into groups, typically in open source, we talk about special interest group. I think that's the term we use when we decide essentially within an open source project to take a limited pool of experts and collaborate together on a very established mandate. Yeah? And by doing this, you can actually empower these people, relatively speaking, to work on this specific objective, right? So that's the starting point. Then the second, I would say, challenge that we had is how do we actually collaborate between the groups? And I think, in your presentation, I saw the topic of open standard. And that's where open standard actually is very important. Because what open standard actually provide to me is actually an API, sorry for the technical term, right, but an API to collaborate between the groups, right? So I'm not talking about technology here. The open standard is the way that different actors in the community can actually collaborate. In the case of OS Climate, that API was creating an open source infrastructure for data exchange, because that's the biggest problem we had. How do we actually communicate and create trust in the data or in the model? So that became very much a kind of overarching horizontal capability we had to build in the project for the different groups to actually operate on a single model and single infrastructure. So that's number two, essentially open standard. And the last, I would say, is actually open governance, because the continued trust will be based on your ability to transparently evaluate what those groups are doing. So obviously in open source, this is probably the easiest, because for open source software, we are used for years now to pretty much document every single technical decision, every single debate, every single proposal is actually captured. So any newcomer to the project or any entity that we operate with, in this case it will be the United Nations, you're actually able to audit in real time what the community is proposing and what it's doing. So I think those three pillars, for me, are probably the essential elements of success in kind of decentralizing innovation.
Okay, great. I'm glad you brought up the trust, especially in the open source community. A lot of it is based on honor system, right? And that kind of trust needs to be developed. That's how projects can become a standard, a de facto standard. Without the trust, nobody's going to use it. You can develop, contribute all day long, but if there's no trust built in, then your contribution is not going to be adopted, right? So, okay, so now let's kind of bring down like a little bit to a lower level a little bit. Let's find out, what's available today. So my next question is for Dr. Sonini. I'm sure most of you are probably extremely foreign to how UN works today, especially in relates to open source. We saw your presentation earlier. So we just want to understand if somebody here in the audience or some kid saw today's presentation and really wanted to contribute, what kind of mechanisms or platforms are available today for someone, an open source developer who wants to contribute and then make an impact to SDG?
Thank you so much, Annie. And I heard all my colleagues here and also you, Christian. I'll get back to these two elements. But how to contribute in a very practical manner. The UN is not on the ground, meaning the UN operate in different member states through the different agencies we have. So when it comes to the country, at country level, it's the United Nations Development Program Agency, which is also very active when it comes to the open source, when it comes to research, and talk about the United Nations University. When it comes to telecommunication, it's ITU. And then at the higher level of the United Nations, meaning at where we are organizing the conference, our main role is to facilitate the dialogue at this time. It's literally to offer that forum to all the stakeholders in the open source to come and discuss together and talk together and find a way to create themselves their own initiative. There are a couple of initiatives today, and then earlier I mentioned, I was not naming that one, meaning getting the right name, but yeah, there is this initiative for the climate change, open source and climate change. There is a big one on open source and education, which is also being deployed jointly with our colleagues at the UNESCO. If there is open source and WHO for health, so there is a lot of UN agencies. Our main role at the Secretariat is literally to bring this to the knowledge of everyone, is to disseminate, but also to build the common guardrails, the common governance model, and the joint agreement on how we are building that, why are we building that, to whom we are building that. So besides of all the bottom-up approaches that we have, where we start from an idea and then we implement it on the ground, and then we would like to replicate it, before reaching the level of replication or a high-level dissemination, we need to sometimes to enforce trust, enforce sustainability of the proposed solution, and continuous stewardship of the open source solution that is being presented, especially when it comes to the AI. The stewardship is becoming a big problem. If you adopt the solution today, you need to be sure that this solution will continue to be delivered or usable across the next 5 years. You all hear about the evolution, for example, of Microsoft Windows, and then the interruption of services. You can't afford that in the open source. Like, we interrupt the service of this model because mainly people are coming to the open source because they take it as a cornerstone, as backbone of the initial thought. So this is a very deep insight of the thinking of development of these solutions. So at the UN, different layers. So this is how we work. UN Secretariat, which is at the facilitation, global agreement, frameworks, this evangelization of the SDG and open source. Now there is a big interest. We are organizing the conference. It will be a strong work stream now, will be strengthened in the upcoming years to build some of the technical infrastructure that is needed. We need to go till the point of building a technical repository for SDGs that is being curated, assembled, curated under the flagship of the UN in order to ensure that this is a trusted solutions, and if you have any other trusted solutions, come and give it to us. What does it mean, come and give it to us? We need that to make a work on that repository, meaning like any other private company, GitHub, Hugging Face. Meaning this is something that we need to build because it's not yet there. I see it in the upcoming years, thanks to you, thanks to all the stakeholders here today. Next year, hopefully, we'll announce the existence of the repository with the access to it and how to collect all these initiatives under the same umbrella. And we are looking forward to this partnership to push forwards, especially when it comes to for the purpose of SDG.
Yeah. So I want to kick it back to Vincent. Since you're CTO, you build solutions, right? And earlier, I'm glad to hear you said, you have to identify a problem, then you build solution for it, right? So with what you just heard, do you think it's sufficient for you to make something happen? For example, you want to help UN, find a solution to combat climate change, right? And you have the best developers. Now you have AI tools to help you. And how can you go about contributing that to meet UN's SDG?
So in my experience, it's been quite challenging. I mean, if I'm honest, right, because like, I give you a concrete example. I think 2 years ago, I was discussing with UNFCCC, and they basically wanted to build a data platform to track the carbon commitments. I did suggest at that time, we were in partnership with Google, and we basically told UNFCCC, we can build that platform for you open source. I'll just get engineer, we can do this in 6 months. We'll basically deliver everything to you. Then I learned actually, as an organization, there's very complex procurement process that needs to be followed. And so they were looking at running a 1-year RFP just to attribute the business to a technology company. And that obviously doesn't work with the open source model. Because as an open source organization, I'm not actually able to enter in a bid and to actually have a commercial proposal, because everything is community dependent, right? So it's and I'm not saying it's an easy switch or proposal, right? Because I totally understand from the point of view of the UN, you are in this commercial construct to also manage the risk of delivery. And delivering something on time within scope in an open source project is extremely difficult. You don't get the typical commercial assurance or clawback if the open source community delivers late or decide to deliver different functionality. So it's a totally different model that needs to be almost built into internal process on how actually the UN could leverage it, right? And I would say almost, and I think to me that's the biggest challenge, right? is the power of open source and innovation and the efficiency it can provide typically for SDG is unparalleled. You are never going to match this with any commercial model out there. If you look at AI as an example, why AI is open source today is because there is no way for proprietary technology to get the scale of innovation and delivery compared to the community. The problem is you need totally different risk management practice internally to accept on how to work with that community and really manage the delivery cycle. And that's like, to me, it's almost like, you know, if you have stopped doing any sport for like 10 years and you suddenly decide on the 1st of January to go to the gym again, the first 2 months is going to be very, very painful to motivate yourself to go to the gym, and it's going to be very painful every time you do some exercise. But you'll have to kind of go through that process for a couple of months before it starts to stick in and you start to see benefits.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the question, is how do we get to that point where we can go through that painful initial stage to get to the benefit?
Yeah, and wow, he speaks like a CTO. I can tell he's hands-on. And I remember Dr. Sanini and you and me and Ms. Lin, we talked about, you know, similar kind of issues in Geneva. You were saying one of the biggest challenges, you have a lot of point technologies, but you need somebody who can glue things, somebody like Vincent who can glue things together, make it a solution, and make it working for a country or a region, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's because we are talking to policymakers. So, meaning today I'm the interface between although I'm all technical and geeks and policymakers. And you can see how frustrated our policymakers not to realize what is the open source. They can't even understand the business model behind it. I'm not even talking about technical layers. So when you try to convince them that the open source is a sustainable solution also, or a sustainable way, it can't fit within the classical mentality of these organizations. I'm not talking specifically about the UN, but all policymakers. So since it's not a good fit, it seems that not a good fit because it's not prepared or designed for, then it's a rejection. So it's the change management phase that will be the hardest, I think. Right. And within that change management, we have to do a work as a technologist to reduce the complexity, to showcase the return on investment, because these things are, and put some KPI. I'll give you a very simple example. If you pick today any piece of open source from GitHub or Hugging Face, for us, it will be hard. It will be complex to run. It's not that a straightforward and easy process. So given that complexity that we are building for ourselves, we need to start thinking of translating that complexity and making it a little bit easier to understand and to catch by policymakers. It's essential to establish the dialogue, I think.
Right. Yeah. It's not very different from the commercial world, right? That's a very big challenge to open source. We have a lot of Lego parts, right? But then to put all these Lego parts together, make it a working solution, and it is very challenging. That's why we have a company like Red Hat, right, who can piece things together and then make it a solution for their customers. So when we are helping out, you know, UN with the SDGs, we also should have that kind of mindset. You can't just throw technologies out there saying, hey, it's my goodwill, take it. But we need to think about how to, you know, kind of make it a working solution for people who want to benefit from our work. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next area, which is policy and legal consideration. And so we actually have somebody, well, we have somebody who actually has a law experience, you know, education. And yeah, first of all, I want to ask Dr. Sanini again. So what are the biggest legal and regulatory barriers today to prevent open source projects from scaling in a way that supports global SDGs, and how might the UN help remove them?
I'll answer with 2 words: sovereignty and trust. Post-COVID crisis, we have seen a rise in the theme of sovereignty, either data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, infrastructure sovereignty. Recently, Europe launched the European sovereign stack, technical stack. Africa is paving the way to African technical stack. That means we need to master what we are installing. We need to be able to verify, validate, and understand the meaning of sovereignty.
Yeah.
You have done a very interesting work on the AI sovereignty,
Right.
and I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Let me suppose that I'm changing my government or bringing some open source AI inside of my government, which kind of services can I use that, afford to bring AI in? Which services should not be with the AI or should be with the proprietary AI? This is a sensitivity of the data, of the services, but also of the continuity. Because as I said again, if the model is stopped, you lost your sovereignty, and then literally that's what happens. The second is about trust. And the trust comes with responsibility and accountability.
Right.
Both. Meaning we can't isolate that. Yesterday I asked the question about accountability. I see that, that's not the main subject or the main spirit. If we want to scale up, we have to when talking to policymakers, we have to show them that this is the way to build accountability and responsibility, even if it's open source.
Right.
Meaning it's not coming from nowhere. And the moment you adopt that, you should be able to allocate these two elements to build trust. Today, unfortunately, we do not have a specific framework to be able to allocate this set of responsibility when we pick open source piece. We don't know. Yeah. We know, but we don't know. Right. Meaning so these two elements, I think, sovereignty, trust, including accountability and responsibility, I think are much important to scale up at the level of policymaker.
Okay. Anybody wants to add something to this topic? No. Yeah. So Richard, finally, I don't want to get to you. So I know licensing issue is very complex, even within our own open source community.
Yeah.
And then, so if we want to extend to our engagement with UN, how should the UN approach issues of licensing, IP, and data sharing to reduce friction for contributors while still protecting sensitive information? And Richard has a legal background, so I'm counting on you, Richard.
Yeah. And actually, what's my consideration is that what is the positioning of the UN SDGs compared to the foundations like Linux Foundation or OSI? I think the first thing is that different entity, they have different positioning. And for example, OSI is solve the license issue, right? So UN SDGs issue to decide its criteria, what is for SDGs and what is for the good licensing model or not a bad licensing model to collaborate with some, for example, OSI or collaborate with some foundations like the Linux Foundation. And when we know what is UN SDGs, then we have the criteria and we can say what project or what entity fit in this criteria, and we can give a badge or give something to prove that it is UN SDGs compatible or approved project. And then the UN is near the policymaker, and the foundation is somehow is near the industry, not policymaker. So if the UN SDG, the group, they are lobbyists to many countries, to many policymakers, say what is good open source operation and framework, and sell the framework to the legal guy and to the legislative. Yeah, so every country, if they buy in this, and we can have a new norm or new legal framework during the countries. So I think it's a policy and a legal thing to improve this.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody wants to add to it? Okay. If not, so Matt, in addition to MOF, his next baby is a license for AI. It's called Open MDW license. And I think UN is obviously going to get into AI, open source AI. And can you tell us, how your MDW license could be utilized by UN? Maybe you want to give a good overview of MDW.
Yeah, I can kind of give an overview, and I'll try and draw the parallels. So the license itself is a very succinct license. It's a single page. It is got a little bit of, there's a lot we've learned with open source licenses over the last 20 years. And there's a lot to be learned from AI and how AI works. And so the license is really designed to capture the nuances of models. And we kind of looked at the world through like the open science lens, which is where in research we want to make sure that we're very verbose, we include all components, we're very concerned about reproducibility and transparency and these sort of factors that help advance science. So the license was designed in a way that it can encapsulate that sort of paradigm, which is also a classification level in the MOF, but also go all the way down the stack, right, of the options. And so it does cover source code, which most model architectures are embodied in source code. Some are embodied in configurations. It does cover model weights, the parameters of the model that are used to make decisions or make predictions. And then it covers data sets as well as documentation. And the one thing that we tried to do with this license was to touch on something that other model licenses and other software licenses don't capture, which is model outputs, right? It's something that people keep skirting around. But if I create a model, right, and I release it under Apache 2.0, is everything that's generated in code from that model also covered under Apache 2.0? You can't answer that question because the assumption is no, but it's not implicit in the design of the model license. And so those Apache 2.0, MIT were always designed around conventional software paradigms. They covered code. Some make reference to documentation, but the words are very specific software. AI is not just software. And so this license was meant to be simple, easy, just drop it in the base of your repo that you're very familiar with open source software development. And whatever your components you include, it covers. If you really want to license your documentation under CC BY, or you want to license a data set under another license, it's 100% compatible with other licenses. So we feel like it's a pretty good solution. It is not the sort of born out of strictly just technologists, but a lot of attorneys had their eyes on it, over 200. And so we believe it's a pretty solid license. It's the first version. Happy to get feedback from folks, but would really love to see more adoption on it.
Yeah. So if people want to find out more about this license, they just Google OpenMDW?
Yeah, openmdw.ai.
Okay.
It's
great. Okay, now moving on to the next part of the discussion, which is about alignment and validation. So we heard about trust a lot, quite a bit. And without trust, there's no adoption, right? So, so my next question is, what role can transparency metrics and open evaluation play in envisioning the contributions are not only made, but also sustained and effective in achieving SDG outcomes? And I'd like to ask Ms. Young, because you work with the government on policies. Can you give us some insight on what sort of things that UN can do in the areas of transparency metrics and open evaluation?
Okay. Because of my poor English, maybe you need the translator to understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it in Chinese too. Yeah.